Was all about is the attempt by President Nixon and his administration to cover up a burglary, stealing, all right? And what was being stolen was information from his opponents out of the Democratic National Committee headquarters, which was located in the Watergate Hotel. So, now, I'm not going to tell you that Richard Nixon was a terrible president. He was actually pretty decent. When he took office, the executive branch, for whatever reasons, the office of the president was extremely powerful. After World War II, the Great Depression, the Cold War, the office of the presidency was an extremely powerful branch of the government. And, Richard Nixon kind of stepped into that imperial or supreme authority with ease. He did not want to be seen as a man of the people. He says, "I'm the president. I'm in charge." So, he almost wanted to have a kingly nature, and he acts like it as well. He would impound funds from the federal programs for his own agenda. Any agendas that opposed him, he would take funds away from them. He ordered troops to invade a foreign country in Cambodia without permission from Congress. He acts very much like an imperial ruler, like a king. So, as he distanced himself from Congress, he confided in fewer and fewer people, and his inner circle included a very fiercely loyal group, and they're called the President's Men. Just kind of as a slang term, as a nickname. And it's H.R. Haldeman. He was the White House Chief of Staff. You can see them all up here. Now, these men played key roles in President Nixon's administration, not only in the decision-making, but also in getting him elected. They were very important in his 1968 election. And once President Nixon won, they were very influential in helping the president to direct White House policy. So, throughout his career, President Nixon was always fearful of losing elections. It was a terrifying notion to him. And he'd lost a bunch. Remember 1960, he lost to President Kennedy. He ran for president and lost to Kennedy. So, Nixon wanted to seek out any kind of advantage by any means possible, including an attempt to steal information from his opponent, the Democrats. So, at 2:30 a.m. on June 17, 1972, a guard at the Watergate complex, the hotel, in Washington, D.C., caught 5 men breaking into the campaign headquarters of the Democratic National Committee. The burglars had planned to take photographs of documents. The burglars had planned to place wiretaps on the phones. The burglars wanted to find any information they could for their strategy in the 1972 presidential election. The press soon discovered that the group's leader, a man by the name of James McCord, was a former CIA agent. So, just 3 days after the burglary, the cover-up quickly begins. Workers shred all evidence and documents that were in the offices of the president's men who set up the burglary. All these guys here, they're the ones who set it up. The White House, with President Nixon's consent, asked the CIA to urge the FBI to stop investigating the burglary, to just stop investigating it. In addition, the committee to re-elect the president, that's President Nixon's committee, that guy James McCord, he was the leader of it. And that organization, the committee to re-elect the president, began to hand out close to $500,000 to the burglars themselves to keep their mouths shut, to just be busted and don't rat. Here's money, in an attempt to buy their silence. because they were caught. They just wanted to keep them quiet. So throughout the 1972 presidential campaign, and this was in June. When is the election? November. So from June to November, the campaign, the Watergate burglary actually generated very little interest.
Did Martha Mitchell figure it out first and tell everyone, and they just wrote it in a women's column?
She is not typically credited with the credit, given the credit. That usually goes to these two guys. So, like I said, the Watergate burglary generated very little interest. And when the two reporters from the Washington Post kept on the story in a series of articles, they uncovered information that linked numerous members of the president's administration to the burglary. And that was Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. They're reporters. Okay? Now, the White House reads the newspaper, obviously, and President Nixon always responded to these charges and said, this totally false and erroneous, and just kind of covered it up. Never just totally denied it. So, largely, the election goes on, and President Nixon wins. He wins again, okay? So, but these tapes, but Woodward and Bernstein do not give up. They continue to dig. They continue to look into the concerns about what actually happened. And the more they dug, the more they found cover up and cover up and cover up and cover up. So after a year-long battle actually begins between Woodward, Bernstein, and Nixon's administration. And what Woodward and Bernstein found out through their investigative reporting is that President Nixon was a very paranoid man, and he had a tape recorder in the Oval Office and recorded every single conversation that ever happened with anyone. He recorded it on tape, like literal, not like digital, memory, but actual film is like audio recordings. And once they discovered that, they said, we want to hear them. You got them in storage, let's hear them. So a year-long battle for those tapes ensued, which ultimately culminated in what became known as the Saturday Night Massacre, where the entire White House was basically under siege, and everybody knew about the tapes. Nixon refuses to release them on claims that there would be sensitive information on there. I'm sure there's sensitive information on there. You talking to people, trying to hire people to go burglarize somebody. So the entire White House was under siege. Vice President Spiro Agnew, he resigned. He resigned first once it was revealed that he had accepted bribes from engineering firms when he was the governor of Maryland. So then there has to be a vice president. So Nixon chooses Gerald Ford, who at that time was like the House Minority Leader. And he was quickly confirmed. And ultimately, by the spring of 1974, there was so much evidence beginning to mount. And President Nixon goes on television. And before a television audience, he said that he was going to release about 1,200 pages of edited transcripts from his White House conversations about Watergate. So he says he's going to release the transcripts, like somebody has put the words from the tapes on paper. Nixon's offering fails to satisfy investigators who want the tapes unedited. They don't want to hear someone else's edited transcripts. They want the tapes themselves. Nixon refused. And then ultimately the case goes before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the president must surrender the tapes. He has to give them up. So Nixon holds the argument that it's could harm national security. But so at a press conference, he gives the famous speech, "I'm not a crook." Because ultimately, what is he in trouble for? conspiracy to burglarize, and then cover it all up. So, even without holding the original tapes, the United States Congress determines that there was enough evidence to impeach President Nixon. And on July 27th of 1973, the committee approved 3 articles of impeachment. First off, what does it mean to impeach? To accuse of wrongdoing. They did not charge him with like burglary. They charged him with abuse of power. That's one article. Another article is obstruction of justice. And the third is contempt of Congress for not releasing the tapes. He never did. Okay? So, eventually he is forced. Hey, can I help you?
I need to ask you what we did in class today.
Can you wait till next period?
And we'll be here.
Okay. Look on Schoology.
Okay.
All right. So, as the Supreme Court rules, he has to release the tapes on August the 5th. He does, and they're just totally fabricated. There's 18.5-minute gaps in some of the tapes where it's just silence. According to Rosemary Woods, who was his secretary, she accidentally messed up with the tapes. Like, it was her fault. So, but I mean, the tapes themselves were pretty watered down and useless. So, but obviously, to anyone on the outside looking in, what's going on here? He's just straight covering it all up. Okay, so the evidence was beginning to be overwhelming. So with all these articles of impeachment brought on him, President Nixon announces that he will resign, being the first president to ever do that. He would have probably been removed from office.
So him resigning means he wasn't impeached, or
But before they could really bring all the articles to like have a vote, he resigned.
So he just resigned.
So technically, they drafted the articles of impeachment, but he was never technically like a vote taken. Okay, so Nixon never admitted any guilt. He merely said that he made some wrong judgments, and the next day he returns home to his home state of California with his wife Pat. And Gerald Ford is sworn in as the 38th President of the United States. Okay? Now, the effects of Watergate are more important, more long-standing than the actual scandal itself. They've endured long after Nixon's resignation. Eventually, 25 members of Nixon's administration were convicted and went to prison. Along with the divisive war in Vietnam, Watergate produced a deep disillusionment in the American people. The American public and the media developed a general cynicism about public officials. And that still exists today. Just like yesterday, I asked you, how many of you guys have trust and faith in the United States government? And nobody put their hands up. Watergate had a lot to do with that. Watergate remains the scandal and investigative story against which all others are measured. Okay? So, President Nixon's out. Who's in? Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford urged Americans to put the Watergate scandal behind them. He said our long national nightmare is over, but our nightmarish economy was persisting. And Gerald Ford himself, he was just the Senate, the minority leader in the Senate, like a couple weeks prior to this. Now he's president of the United States. So things were moving fast for him. Himself, he is a likable man. He was an honest man. And he spoke pretty candidly about his limitations. He's quoted as saying, "I'm a Ford. not a Lincoln. Couple meanings there. Meaning number one, the difference between the car, Ford and Lincoln. And then obviously, he's Ford, not Abraham Lincoln. Okay, he's not going to be a great president in his own mind. And largely, he gets off to a really bad start because he uses one of the powers of the presidency to pardon President Nixon so that Nixon will never go to jail. That's pretty unpopular. Pretty unpopular move. But he says, he does it as an attempt to try to move the country forward as opposed to having a long, drawn-out trial with a former president of the United States who resigned in shame. He does a lot to try to carry out Kissinger and Nixon's foreign policies in negotiations with China. He goes to Helsinki, Finland, and does these things called the Helsinki Accords, which becomes his greatest accomplishment as president. What this does is it increases cooperation between nations in Eastern and Western Europe, which is a big deal. Bringing together East and West has always been a problem. But Gerald Ford, he wants to win an election of his own. And in 1976, he wins the Republican nomination, defeating that time Governor of California, Ronald Reagan, and runs for the office of president against the Democratic contender, a peanut farmer from Georgia named Jimmy Carter. Now, he was a nationally unknown man. He was the governor of Georgia. And during the post-Watergate era, cynicism or doubt about the Washington establishment ran very high. And the soft-spoken, personable man from Plains, Georgia, promised to restore the integrity and promised that he would never tell a lie to the American people. Those are his words, spoken pretty accurately, I must say. So throughout the presidential campaign, Carter and Ford squared off, and on Election Day, Jimmy Carter wins a very narrow margin and becomes President of the United States.
What year is this election?
1976, the bicentennial of our country, the 200-year anniversary. From the very beginning, Jimmy Carter and the first family brought a down-to-earth style to Washington. After settling into office, Jimmy Carter stayed in touch with people by holding Roosevelt-like fireside chats. Now, he didn't do it over the radio. Some of them were on the radio, but the majority of them were through television. Unfortunately, Carter failed to reach out to Congress in a similar way because he didn't play the insider games like Congress likes to do, wheeling and dealing, making deals behind closed doors. He relied mainly on his advisors that he brought with him from Georgia. So Carter has some pretty significant problems that he steps into when he becomes president. One of the first major crises that's staring him in the face is an energy crisis. It was pretty rough. Like depending upon what your license plate on your car started with, like if it started with a letter, you could get gas on Monday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays or something. And if it started with a number, you could get it on Tuesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. Like there was only certain days of the week you were allowed to purchase gasoline because there just wasn't enough. And a lot of there just wasn't enough gas. Like you may not have gasoline. Like, yeah, our gasoline's expensive, but you go buy it, it's there. In the 70s, you might not have any gasoline. So that is definitely a crisis. And so that's one of the things that he has to confront within his first 100 days of office. And that's what we'll talk about next time. And we will finish period 9 in the next, after 20 more minutes of me talking. Okay?